The Nightfall Strike playlist is one of the longest running activities in all of Destiny. It has existed in some form since day one of Destiny 1 and has seen many iterations over the years. The current style of Nightfalls, called Nightfall Ordeals, do a lot of things right, but there are some major problems with the activity that I wish to discuss in this video. Namely, there is one big problem regarding Nightfall Ordeals, and that is they are simply not very fun. And if you want to get the best rewards, you must play the least fun version of the activity. But before I get too far into this video, I want to give my Discord a small shout out, as I'm trying to build up the server to a point we can have community game nights and other stuff like that. If that interests you at all, I highly encourage you to check out the Discord linked below. But anyways, let's get back to the topic at hand. Nightfall Ordeals, as I'm sure you all know, were first introduced with the Shadowkeep expansion, and are heavily intertwined with the champion system, which was introduced at the same time. This new version of Nightfalls also had several other key differences to previous iterations. Namely, this new version allowed players to change the difficulty of the activity depending on the experience you wanted. This version of the Nightfall also restricted the weekly Nightfall from 3 strikes down to 1. Raising the difficulty setting of Nightfall Ordeals has several effects. It raises the power level of enemies, adds more modifiers to the strike, adds more champions as the difficulty level increases, and increases the amount of rewards earned upon completion of a strike. This system is all fine and good, especially since players have been wanting a more difficult experience within Destiny for years. The only problem is that Bungie's way of increasing difficulty also severely decreases the amount of fun to be had within the activity. Almost every part of the Nightfall Ordeal leads to a less fun strike experience than the regular Vanguard Strike playlist. This is all for a number of reasons, the first of which is the power level increases. Power levels in Destiny are super dumb and are an arbitrary number. It's not like in other games that offer a set damage or defense value that equally translates across the game, because unlike a traditional system like that, power levels basically dictate how easily you can get one shot and not much else. Power levels are many players' least favorite aspect of the game, and rightfully so. You don't get more powerful as you increase your power level, because no matter how much you outlevel content, it does not make a difference at all. But if you are underleveled in content by even just 1 or 2 power levels, it will feel like all enemies are basically doing double damage to you. This system should honestly be named a weakness level instead of a power level. But what does this have to do with Nightfalls, some of you are probably thinking? Well, it's because at the higher end Nightfall levels, the power level is so high that many things will simply 1 or 2 shot you. This gives players a very big sense of helplessness most of the time they die, and it overall just leads to the pace of the game slowing to a crawl. Because due to the high power level of enemies, oftentimes the most effective strategy is just to sit back and pick away at the enemies from afar instead of rushing in and using all of your cool weapons and abilities. This undoubtedly adds difficulty, but in mine and many others' opinion, it's the wrong kind of difficulty, because instead of complementing the game's mechanics, it punishes players for attempting to use them and forces players into a super slow and defensive playstyle. And on the topic of pushing players into specific playstyles, I think it's time to talk about the champion system. The champion system is reliant on a system of seasonal mods that change every season and only apply to specific weapons. These mods give weapons the ability to stop champion enemies from using their abilities. These mods are often unneeded for lower level champions and lower level activities such as Season of the Chosen's Battlegrounds, but when you start moving up the difficulty ladder, especially in Nightfalls, it becomes imperative to have anti-champion mods. And this isn't a scenario of, oh, these weapons are best for the situation, but we can do it without them. No, in Nightfalls, it is essentially impossible to complete them without anti-champion mods, especially considering that players must kill all of the champions within a strike if they want the best chance at earning the Nightfall rewards at the end of the mission. This leads to some very big problems, namely that players' builds are entirely dependent on what weapons Bungie decides are viable for the season. For instance, say you build your entire character around using pulse rifles and shotguns. and then the new season releases, and you can't use either of those weapons in high-end activities. This is super disheartening and does not respect players' time at all. I mean, just look at the current season of The Chosen. If you're going into a Nightfall that has barrier champions, then you are stuck using either scout rifles or snipers, two of the worst weapons for PvE. I know there are some sniper rifles that are good, but I'm just saying, generally, those are two weapons you are not using in PvE encounters. And if there's an unstoppable champion, then you are forced to use hand cannons to deal with it, and you don't really have a choice at all. This system restricts players' loadouts and the amount of fun they can have in the game. Loot is a very important part of Destiny, and when there are only 5 types of weapons which can be used in in-game content, it makes a large portion of the game extremely irrelevant, and the problem only gets worse as you increase the Nightfall difficulty, because at the lower levels there's only one type of champion, so you only need to restrict one of your weapons. But at higher difficulties, there are all kinds of champions, so your entire loadout is basically picked for you. I should mention though, that challenges designed around specific loadouts work for some games. A prime example of this would be sniper missions or turret missions in Call of Duty, where the point of the game is to get a linear experience that is handcrafted to be experienced in a specific way. But Destiny is not like that. Destiny is a game around building your perfect character with the best stats, weapons, powers, and abilities to take on specific situations, and being able to take on specific situations with a wide variety of powers and abilities. The champion system goes entirely against this idea by heavily restricting the options players have at their disposal. But beyond the champion system, there is one more big issue I have with the Nightfall Ordeals, and that is the fact that there is only one per week. Strikes as an activity are some of the most unreplayable pieces of content in the game. They are straight, linear missions with no variation between playthroughs, and strikes get their replayability from having a large pool of strikes to play so you don't get stuck with the same mission over and over again. Bungie decided to forget this with Nightfalls, and as such, every week you are stuck grinding one strike over and over and over again. The path doesn't change, the enemies don't change, the tactics don't change, and due to champions your loadout doesn't change. This leads to one of the most boring and unfun experiences ever. Because when all of the problems from this video are combined, Nightfalls go from challenging but rewarding strikes to a slog of slowly completing the same mission over and over and over again with the same guns for an entire week. This is one of the most repetitive and restrictive things in all of Destiny, and it makes Nightfalls possibly the most unenjoyable activity in Destiny, especially at higher levels. So how should the system be improved? Well, first of all, Bungie needs to get a better system to increase difficulty. Many games will do this by making enemies smarter, more accurate, and more numerous. I think all of these changes would work much better than just jacking up their damage and health like the current power leveling system does. Bungie needs to understand that there is more to difficulty than just making the players weaker. And if Bungie needs an example of a good way to increase difficulty, I would look back on Destiny 1 strike modifiers. These modifiers would drastically change how strikes are played along with how difficult strikes can be. The Destiny 1 modifiers outdo their Destiny 2 counterparts in nearly every way, and I think bringing back some of these modifiers would be a good way to increase difficulty without resorting to straight up buffing the power level of enemies. And to go alongside this, Bungie needs to completely revamp the champion system. Because champions are made with good intentions, just poor execution. I like that Bungie is looking for ways to give different weapons specific purposes, but I think there's a better way to go about it. Namely, they need to be able to be dealt with even if you don't have anti-champion mods. There are a large amount of different ways Bungie could do this. It could be anything from associating different elements with different champions, or adding weak spots on champions that could be exploited by all weapons, or maybe tying specific parts of champions to specific abilities within subclasses, or something like that, maybe making barrier enemies have a weak spot on their shields that can be forced down by melee abilities, and unstoppable champions can be stunned by shooting an armored spot on their back. Really, any solution here could probably work, and it would greatly improve all aspects of the game. And the final thing that Bungie needs to do to fix Nightfalls is simply to add more than one every week. Bungie already does this with the Grandmaster Nightfalls, because players can select which of the 6 Grandmaster Nightfalls they want to do every day, without having to wait for a specific week that the strike is in rotation. I don't see why that system can't be brought to all levels of difficulty for Nightfalls, because it gets super repetitive having to play the same strike over and over and over again. It seems like a needless restriction that worsens the activity as a whole and lessens the amount of fun that can be had. But that's really all I have to say regarding Nightfalls and how I think they should be fixed. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you liked what you saw, please check out my previous Destiny and Halo content, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time, goodbye.